I'll fuck you till you love me.
Kneel before General God, square of Krypton. No Asgard. Use the sword. Let off the non-reloading immediately. Final toast.
So, I like Thor as a character in the comics, and hell, I like the Norse mythology that he's taken from. Very similar to how I feel about the Roman and Greek mythology. I think that shit is very interesting, and I love killing those legends and creatures of myth as Kratos. So as a fan of Thor, it actually kinda sucks to not really care that much for him in the MCU. And with Love and Thunder on the way, I figured it would be a good as time as any to talk about 2017's Thor Ragnarok, and my complicated feelings on it. But since we're on the subject, I figured hell, I might as well talk to you guys briefly about the other two Thor movies, 2011's Thor, then 2013's Thor The Dark World. These sections will be much shorter because they aren't the main focus of the video, but I figured hell, I might as well take a few minutes to talk about them. I'll have some timestamps down below if you want to just skip ahead. So, let's get into it. So in 2011, Thor hit theaters and introduced the God of Thunder into the MCU. When I first saw this over 11 years ago, I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed it, but I think it's because I was just really excited to see Thor in live action. Over the years after rewatching it, my opinions have changed, and it's definitely not as good as I remembered. But I still think it's decent enough nonetheless. I'm going to assume you've already seen this movie, so I'm not going to go into crazy detail about the plot or events. And I figure we all know how this story goes. Thor is young, cocky, brash, bullheaded, and arrogant. He disobeys his father Odin, who then strips him of his powers and exiles him to Earth. And there he learns humility and basically gets humbled and grows as a person. He also makes some new friends and falls in love. And then at the end, he's worthy enough to lift his hammer Mjolnir and gets his powers back. Simple enough. So story-wise, it's very straightforward and serviceable. It introduces Thor, Loki, Odin, and Asgard easily enough, and the cast overall is pretty decent. And there are several things here that I really enjoyed. Chris Hemsworth as Thor was really good. He plays the cocky, young, headstrong character very well. He's also really likable. And seeing him be the fish out of water on Earth was very entertaining. Anthony Hopkins as Odin was great. He plays the old, wise king very well. And Tom Hiddleston as Loki just stole the show. He was a smart and cunning villain, and I like seeing him manipulate and trick Thor, as well as scheming to take the throne. And there are several good scenes between all three of them. And the side characters were fine. Jane Foster, Darcy, Eric Selvig, they were all okay. But Thor, Odin, and Loki really carried the whole movie, because everything else was just pretty average. You get some decent visuals, although the CGI is a little dated, because this was 2011, but I won't harp on it too much. Nothing looked absolutely terrible. I like seeing all the stuff in Asgard, though I wish we saw more of it, instead of just some halls and exterior shots. The action was pretty lacking. There was a decent amount of it. I just mean that it wasn't the most creative outside of the sequence on Jotunheim. It was a whole lot of close-ups and quick cuts, and nothing really impressive. Even the final battle was very underwhelming. Both parts of it, Thor defeating the Destroyer, and Thor and Loki fighting. A great exchange and conversation between Thor and Loki, but not really a great fight. Music is also forgettable as hell. Not many moments where it felt epic or triumphant. And even though Thor isn't actually Thor for half of the movie, because he loses his powers, I'm not actually too upset about that because it was for the story and to develop him as a character. Overall, it was just okay. Not amazing, not great, just okay and serviceable. There are some good scenes and moments, and a few decent action sequences, and a few cool visuals, but nothing crazy. It's all really just carried by Thor being very likable and his journey to not being an arrogant prick, and Loki being a very mischievous villain. I don't hate it, but there are some people who do, and I do understand why they feel that way. Again, I think I'm a little biased because I was just really excited to see Thor in the MCU for the first time. But I do think this movie serves as a pretty decent introduction to Thor, Loki, and Norse mythology in general. But one thing was for certain, I was definitely excited to see more of Thor in the MCU, and I couldn't wait for the sequel. Now, I was hyped for Thor The Dark World, for a few reasons. First was because Thor was going to have his powers the whole time, meaning more action, and more of seeing Thor be an actual god. Second was because Loki was back, and after his appearance in Avengers, his status was elevated, and was an even better villain than the first time. And third was, we're going to go off-Earth and see more of Asgard and other worlds. And on top of all of that, the trailer made things seem bigger and more epic this time around. A stronger villain, so powerful that Thor had to team up with Loki, a giant event that not only affects Earth, but every other realm. After seeing this trailer, I was down for it. Hell, I got the giant cup from the theaters because I was so excited. And then I saw it, and man, what a letdown. Where to start? I guess I'll start with the good things, so this won't take too long. Loki really carried the whole movie. He was the most entertaining character, and in true Loki fashion, he's just always scheming. Every scene involving him was great, and Thor is likable as always, and I did like seeing his character develop in between movies. In the first, he was very bullheaded and brash, but now he's more calm, collected, and actually thinks and plans instead of acting on impulse. So Thor and Loki, easily the best characters, and they have some of the best moments. Let's see what else is good. The CGI and action are better than the first. We get to see more of Asgard, which I liked. We also saw a few more different planets, and the were a few moments where I thought, hey, that looked pretty cool. And as a smaller touch, the outfits that Thor, Loki, and Odin, and all the other Asgardians wear look great. Much better than the first movie's attire. Yeah, that's about it. Just about everything else is either bland, boring, or lackluster. Starting with just about every other character that isn't Thor or Loki. All the side characters are even more forgettable than they were in the first, except Heimdall, but he's played by Idris Elba, so I'm a little biased. Jane Foster, though, is so damn boring. Natalie Portman looked like she really didn't want to be there, and even Anthony Hopkins as Odin seemed bored half the time. But I guess there's only so much you can do with a weak script. He's a great actor. I think he did the best with what he had, but what he had wasn't much. And Malekith is easily the worst MCU villain. The guy is boring and uninteresting as hell. I seriously didn't care for him or his motive at all. And the whole plot and story in general is just boring. For all that happened, nothing seemed to have weight because the characters were dull, the villains sucked, and all just lacked any real impact. Like I said, the trailer and the concept may seem like this was going to be a big epic battle, but when you actually watch it, it all just felt flat. Boring music, boring characters, boring plot, boring antagonist, boring movie. The best thing about this movie was the cup that I got in the theaters when I saw it. So yeah, Thor The Dark World was a disappointment. Bland, boring, safe, and forgettable, with only a handful of cool moments, and Loki and Thor really being the only standouts. And now, here we are to the main topic, Thor Ragnarok, released in 2017. Now, just like the last two sections, this isn't going to be a deep dive into the characters and plot. I'm going to assume you've already seen the movie, and it's really just going to be me ranting and rambling about things that I didn't really like about it, as well as acknowledging things that it does well. Now, this time around, Marvel took a different approach, and really decided to shake things up. They employed Taika Waititi to write and direct, and they gave him a decent amount of freedom. And he basically took Thor, Loki, and the whole mythos, and went in the completely opposite direction of the first two films. While the previous two movies were fairly serious, though the second implemented more of the quips that the MCU are known for, a byproduct of Joss Whedon's Avengers, Ragnarok decided to ramp up the comedy, the jokes, the humor. Not just with the quips, but visual gags as well. And the whole thing had a buddy cop team-up feel to it. It was a very different approach, and it worked out well for them. It's the highest grossing Thor movie at the moment, and the most well-received, so it seemed like a good move, and many clearly agreed. But for me, when I first saw this, I noticed a clear shift, and I understood why they took this direction. And there are things that it does very well. But even though I understand why this movie is drastically different from the first two, I'm still conflicted on it. Let me explain. So, why the change? I think it's because the first two Thor movies were pretty underwhelming when compared to other MCU hero solo movies, and many just found Thor just plain boring. Even though I like the first Thor movie, it's still generally considered a pretty mid or low tier MCU film. And of course, The Dark World is bottom tier without a doubt. So this complete overhaul of Thor in 2017 was a way to reinvigorate the character, take him from being pretty bland to a character with actual personality, and by all accounts, it worked. But me, being the contrarian prick that I am, I didn't enjoy it as much as others. But don't get me wrong, there are things here that are a definite improvement, which I'm going to list off now. First off, this is easily the best looking Thor movie. Some really good looking visuals and shots, with some really fun and creative action set pieces. There are some moments where the CGI isn't the best, but it's not terrible. And the action overall is great, and the scale of some of these sequences were pretty awesome. And the whole movie basically takes place off Earth, only visiting it very briefly. So we finally get to see somewhere else that isn't Earth for Thor to have an adventure on. And even though the comedy is pretty dumb at times, I will give it credit that there are times where it actually did make me laugh, and it wasn't from a pop culture reference. And the vibe of the whole movie is a comedy, as opposed to like an action movie that has a lot of comedy interjected into it. So the comedy doesn't feel as forced or out of place as it would normally in other MCU movies, if that makes sense. And hell, even the music was pretty good this time around. So when watching, you could say that I was fairly entertained because of all that, because it does do all this stuff pretty well. But now let me talk about the issues that I have with it. And it mainly comes down to the handling of Thor, Loki, and the mythology in general. Starting with Ragnarok. I don't like that they took this event and basically played it up for laughs, and it didn't actually become relevant until like the very end. And then there's Thor. He was always likable, even in the Dark World he was fine, and he was always pretty funny. But here they crank up the humor with him to the point where he feels like a joke at times, and just too dumb. And then there's Loki. Loki was always a great MCU villain, and I really didn't care for him switching to be a good guy after all the shit he's done. And there's even a few times where he's outsmarted, and that's surprising because, you know, he's clever. He always has tricks up his sleeve. But here he doesn't feel like the cunning, smart schemer anymore. Now, for as petty as it sounds, those are the main reasons why I'm conflicted on this movie, and what holds it back for me personally from being something that I really enjoy. The ramped up, goofy comedic approach with the characters and the story is what kills it for me. I figured a movie about Planet Hulk and Ragnarok, you know, the little destruction of Asgard, would be handled more maturely and have more weight. And since it doesn't, it makes me feel disappointed. I guess you could say that I don't really like most of the changes to Thor and his mythology. In the first two movies, the mythology, the legends, and lore of Asgard was handled pretty seriously. In Ragnarok, things are much more comedic, and Hel's return and the destruction of Asgard just feels played up for laughs, because it does take a comedic route. But here's the messed up thing. I fully understand why they let Taika Waititi take this route. MCU movies have been blending more and more comedy into their movies, So might as well take a character who has 2 movies that are pretty underwhelming and kind of dull, and a personality that is pretty basic, and make him really funny and comedic. So it's like, I totally understand why they want to try something completely different for Thor, but I don't really like the changes. But I also didn't care for how bland and boring Thor was before Ragnarok either. You see the dilemma that I'm in? Honestly, I think Thor was handled the best in Infinity War. First off, he's powerful, which is great because, you know, he is a god, or at least god-like. Second, he was very driven for the whole movie. You feel his pain and you want to see him complete his goal. But he also has his moments of comedic relief, but he's not messing around here, and I love seeing this fierce, strong, and focused Thor. So there is a way to have a more serious approach and still have moments of humor, as well as be creative with his lore and his powers. Seriously, Thor in Infinity War is great. I guess that's all I really gotta say. It's really just those few reasons for why I have this love-hate relationship with Thor Ragnarok.
He did it! He said it!
It's like I can look at the movie and see what's objectively better and what it does really well. Like the action is good, the visuals are great, there are some pretty good jokes that made me laugh, and I understand why they went this direction with him, but I'm still not a fan of the way they handled the characters, and the event of Ragnarok just disappoints me. And judging from the trailers that we got for Love and Thunder, it's clear that they're doubling down on everything. So I'm more than likely gonna feel the same way about that movie that I do about this one. I'll see and acknowledge what it does right, and I'll understand why people enjoy it, but it's not for me personally. Just not the direction and approach that I personally like for Thor. And I know some people will disagree, as a matter of fact, I know most will, but this is how I feel. I know it's a really complicated dilemma. I hope I was able to convey my point well enough so you can make sense of what the hell I'm saying. Honestly, I figured over time that the movie will grow on me, but it really hasn't. I feel the same way now, just like it did back in 2017. But I guess it's gonna do it for the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, go and drop a like on it. And leave a comment, let me know what you think about Thor Ragnarok, and how Thor was handled in the MCU in general. Are you a fan of it? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Leave a comment, let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.
Can't help but think I just stand out. No matter what I do, it's bad, it's hurting, and I don't feel like I'm
I'm gonna pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.